just wanted to say welcome to the group that has assembled. I want to thank you for taking time to be with SYA this afternoon, and I want to offer a very special welcome to the resident directors who are on the screen with me today. What we are doing this week is celebrating Founders Week. And to give you a little history, every year at this time of year, we take a moment and think about the founding group of SYAers, including the group of about a dozen SYA boys who set sail from New York over to Spain to begin what we now know and love as the SYA adventure. And last week we had a moment to actually celebrate the 50th anniversary of co-education at SYA. We had 4 women from France and Spain in that founding years. And it was a great seminar, and I think you have a link to that. So if you have a chance, please take a look and a listen. But today what we'd love to do is kind of fast forward to the SYA of today and hear directly from our resident directors about what life is like in SYA. And I'm delighted to be joined by our 3 RDs, Mina and Megan and Pat. And right before you've seen the scroll of their bios, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves in just a minute. But before I do, I just want to take a moment, because I just mentioned SYA 50 plus years ago and SYA today, and to let you know that there are clearly things have changed, but not the core of SYA. The DNA of SYA is still what it has been all along, which is we really do teach our students empathy and understanding through language and through living with host families and through their education for a year abroad. So I'm delighted to be part of that. In fact, just a quick story, I've actually known SYA for over 40 years because I worked for about 3 decades at one of the founding schools, sent many a student over there and faculty member colleague, and was on the board for a while and became SYA's president 5 years ago. So I'm honored to be doing that and delighted to be carrying on this great tradition. So with me today, as I said, are the 3 resident directors, and I'd actually like to ask each to introduce him or herself, but I'd also ask them to talk a little bit about what's foremost on everyone's mind, which is what is life like over in France and Italy and Spain at the moment, because we care deeply about you, we care deeply about our extended SYA families over there, faculty, host families, and also just what's going on in the world. We care deeply. So let me begin, and I'm going to ask, actually probably in seniority order, Pat, who's been with SYA for over 2 decades. Why don't we start with you, Pat?
Buonasera a tutti quanti, vi saluto calorosamente dal centro di Viterbo, qua alla nostra scuoletta in via Cavour 77. I want to welcome everybody to this webinar and let you know that to say how things are going in Italy is very broad and difficult thing to answer, because the foremost on everybody's mind, of course, is the coronavirus, and that has been really isolated into pockets. That's probably left over a little bit from the city-state that governed Italy for the Middle Ages, and that attitude and that way of living is carried out into the modern world. But right here in Viterbo, I think it's not proper to say things are getting back to normal, but people are adapting to the way things are. We've been very fortunate in this area not to have had very much in the way of difficulty from coronavirus, besides the fact that we did send the students home in March, which was a very difficult thing for those students to do and all of us who were left behind. But merchants and citizens are very dutiful about trying to obey the regulations that allow us to get to some semblance of life the way we used to know it. I think people are very resilient, generally very happy. This is a very social population, and so things are quite difficult in terms of greeting one another and learning new ways to say hi that might have to many years of habit. Schools were to start normally on Monday. Viterbo delayed that a little bit, and much to my chagrin, we'll begin online tomorrow with in-person classes starting soon. The whole faculty here wanted me to say hi, and I will end my introduction that way by saying hi from everybody here.
Thank you, Pat. Mina.
All right. Merci, Tom. Monsieur le Président, bonsoir à l'Europe, à tous ceux qui nous écoutent ici en France, en Espagne, en Italie. Bonjour à l'Amérique. Je m'appelle Mina Qadir et je suis la directrice de School Year Abroad France. So I'd be happy to give you an overview of what's going on here in France. As of September 1st, all primary and secondary schools, as well as universities, have resumed in person. The government mandated protocol for school settings requires mask wear for students here over the age of 11 and maintaining a distance of 1 meter when possible in the classroom, which is actually good news for us as we won't have more than 10 to 12 students in each classroom. So with the entire country being open, the latest update I can provide tonight is that about 20 schools have closed, plus about 200 individual classes have been shut down since that big reopening almost 3 weeks ago now. As you have most likely seen in the news, recently the numbers in France and in Europe in general have spiked, which is due to the beautiful weather, people vacationing, and free movement throughout the country and Europe. So therefore, the government and the population continue to remain very attentive. Les cafés, les restaurants, movie theaters, businesses in general are all open. There is, however, in most urban areas, mandatory mask wearing in both enclosed spaces and outdoors. As of yesterday, specific to our city here in Rennes, bars are closing at 11 p.m. For the next 2 weeks, since we have been identified as one of the 47 red zones in France. Just to quickly explain what a red zone is here, it's a 70 infection rate per 100,000 inhabitants tested. So to resume this complicated situation, like Pat mentioned, what I can say is that overall, the country is doing fairly well. Life is as normal as it can get right now. There's wide access to protective equipment. There's more and more access to fast testing. And on a very positive note, there are less cases of COVID-19 ending in intensive care. Also this past Friday, the Prime Minister, Jean Castex, spoke to the nation. 2 things stood out of his speech. Number one, he said that the country will live with the virus and that we will not get shut down again. But there will be restrictions locally if necessary, such as the one I just mentioned about Rennes and the bars closing earlier. And number 2, during his speech, he also announced that if someone needs to be quarantined instead of the 14 days, the new law in France requires a 7-day isolation period. Voilà, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you. And Meghan.
Sí, hola a todos y todas. Gracias, Tom, y Mina y Pat. Soy Meghan, estoy aquí en Zaragoza y es un placer estar aquí con vosotros. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I can mimic a lot of the things that that Pat and Mina said about what's going on in their countries. I think if you came into Spain right now, it looks very similar to what it always looks like, which is lots and lots of people out on the streets, terraces full of people. The difference, of course, is that everyone is in a mask. The law here is that you have to be wearing a mask pretty much at all times unless you're in your home. So students over the age of 6 are wearing masks at school across the country and also keeping the meter distance. All of the schools have gone back. The high schools and middle schools just returned this week. The primary schools went back to school last week. So there have been some classroom closures in different regions naturally because of a positive case here and there, but overall they're pretty happy with the number of schools that have had to close a classroom versus the total number of classrooms. Aragon, which is the region that Zaragoza is in, had a big resurgence earlier in the summer, and fortunately the numbers have gone back down in this area. So there were a couple different explanations for that. A big one was the fact that there's a lot of agriculture work right around Zaragoza, and a lot of those workers were then coming back into the city to their apartments, and just a lot of transmission happened that way. So those numbers have gone back down as they've controlled that better. So it's just kind of an up and down, like I think it is in all of our countries, as far as where there are hot spots, and the kind of restrictions in this area have been similar things to what they're doing in France, with a different timetable for different types of restaurants or bars. All late night places are closed, which those of you who know Spain know that the Spanish enjoy being out very late at night into the next day. So they've had to close down, discoteca type places because of transmission found in those spots. So I think generally though, especially in this part of Spain, people are feeling a lot better than they were a few weeks ago.
Great. Well, you all stay healthy and safe, and pass that along to our extended SYA families and community there. Thanks. One thing I realized I didn't mention, and some of you on this webinar might know this already, which is SYA this fall did postpone, and we do not have students over there right now. We're looking carefully at bringing them over in January, and we'll make that firm decision soon, whether we're able to do that or not. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that we will be able to do that. So stay tuned for more information about that. Let me shift gears, which when I go out and meet with alumni, one of my first questions always is, how'd you find out about School Year Abroad? And it elicits a lot of great conversation and discussion. And so I'm going to turn that question to at least Mina and Meghan. How did you find out about SYA?
Mina, you want to go first?
Sure. My story is pretty short, but it might sound a bit unusual. I heard about SYA the first time at a nail salon in Rennes. My husband and I, with our kids, were on a sabbatical in Rennes in 2015. And I happened to wait for my turn at the salon when I heard a lady speak English with what sounded to me as a heavy East Coast accent. I couldn't place her accent, maybe New York, maybe Boston. So I just walked up to her to say hello and to, quite frankly, have a conversation in English. We had been here for 5-6 months, and I hadn't spoken much English. So long story short, after a few minutes, I had told her about my background in education as a former French language professor in the U.S. And she had told me about SYA Rennes, where her husband was the school director. She said there was some type of job opening, and she wasn't sure which position. So she gave me her husband's cell phone number. I wasn't looking for a job, but out of curiosity, the next day I called Denis Brochu, the director, and we set up an appointment, and I walked out of his office being the part-time college counselor. So I'm very glad I did engage in that conversation with Linda that day, and they're both back in the US now, and we actually talked last week, and we're still in touch. So that's sort of my SYA story.
Well, we thank Linda Brochu each and every day, Mina. That's a great story. Meghan, how about you?
Well, mine actually also was from overhearing a conversation, but at my school that I was teaching at. I was at Louisville Collegiate School for 8 years, and one of my first years there, I was at the time teaching middle school and some upper school classes, and a young woman who was a senior was speaking to another one of my colleagues in Spanish, and her Spanish was just incredible. She wasn't my student, so I hadn't heard her speaking Spanish before. And so I asked her, you know, wow, why is your Spanish so good? You know, are your parents from Spain? And I also noted that she had an accent from Spain. And she told me that she had done this program called School Year Abroad the year before. And so that was my first introduction to knowing what School Year Abroad was. So I must have just filed it away in the back of my head, because over the next about decade, I was teaching in the U.S. during the school year, and then I was in the study abroad sector in Spain in the summers with Oxbridge. And eventually my husband and I decided to move abroad again, and we moved to Portugal, and then we decided to look into coming back to Spain, where we'd lived together before as well. And so I decided on a whim, just, you know, well, I'll just check what was that school called, and I remembered SYA, and so I looked it up, and I just by chance, the resident director position was open. That was in December, and the application materials were due at the beginning of January of that year. So I had just a few weeks, because it was around Christmas when we had made that decision to start looking back into being in Spain. And so I applied, and here I am.
Yeah. And I remember, Megan, when you came in for the interview, it was clear to all of us we had hit the right person to be the RD. So great that you're here. Hey, Pat, I was wondering, just to shift the question a little bit, how did you get connected to the Italian language and culture? Right? Yeah, I know you've been in Viterbo for over 20 years. So what was your first connection?
Well, my name might betray the fact that my mother was Mariangela Menicucci. So my grandparents were both born in Tuscany. My grandfather's story is what many immigrants faced. He was 13 years old. He was all alone. He had no money. He had no language. And he took off for the United States anyway. Made a life for himself in the United States, ended up in New Mexico. And my mother was born in the early 30s and spoke Italian in Albuquerque for the first 6 years of her life until she went to school. So her first language was Italian, and my grandmother never spoke a word of English. So I just heard the language when I was a child, and it didn't at the time make me want to learn it. I basically communicated with my grandmother by smiling at her. She smiled back. And so after college, I thought it would be a nice thing I had the urge to get to Europe. I'd met some of my teammates from the University of Mexico were from Europe and invited me to see them. And I put together an itinerary where I would end up in Italy to meet my cousins. And when I walked into my grandmother's house in Lucca, they were cooking a meal that smelled exactly like what she made in Albuquerque. All this just got me to think maybe I'd like to do this and learn this language and get to know these relatives of mine here. And so it started in like 1986. And I think like what many of our students feel, that having acquired this language later, it became something that was a part of me. And so that when I was done with that year and went home, I just missed it immensely, and looked very much forward to any opportunity I could get back. I took a job at Albuquerque Academy. It was a member school of SYA. And in 2001, they opened a site. I was fortunate enough to become the English teacher at that time, 2002. So that's how it happened.
Yeah. Hey, Pat, out of curiosity, I know we do require students in France and Spain to have the language study at least 2 years before they get over there. Italy, we don't have that. How many students do come with some knowledge of the Italian language?
It's about 5%. It's really very few. Most of our students are pure beginners. Some that we do get are heritage speakers, and some that there were 2 students last year that came to Italy many years ago, liked it, and just learned as much as they could on their own, and got here with a very good working knowledge, but it's very few.
Mm-hmm. And Megan, quickly, how did you get connected to the Spanish language?
Well, I studied Spanish in high school, like many people in the U.S. do. It wasn't really anything I felt a strong passion towards at that time. when I went to college, I decided to do international studies of Europe, and it was an obligation to study a language along with that. And so I chose to continue studying Spanish just because I already had that experience. And another thing that you had to do, but I was very happy to do it, was to study abroad when you were doing that major. And so I was double majoring in Spanish and international studies. And obviously the only choice in Europe where they're also speaking Spanish is Spain. So when I got here for the first time as a junior in college, it really was the very first time that I was like, oh, okay, this is why, you know, it makes sense to be learning another language. It just completely changed. I mean, I don't know if you could say changed, because I can't really say that at 20 I knew what my kind of life path was, but it definitely determined all of the next choices that I made, and the relationships that I was able to form because I could speak Spanish quite well. And then over the 6 months, obviously much better after that. It just made me really realize the value of knowing another language versus, you know, being able to come over and see a place or be here as a tourist, but knowing my Spanish family the way I still do, and some of my closest friends are from Spain, those relationships just wouldn't have been possible without Spanish. So
Yeah. I mentioned earlier when I meet with alums, I ask them, you know, how'd you find out about SYA? Another question I usually ask them is, you know, tell me a little bit about, you know, what your SYA experience was like. What's your SYA moment? What do you kind of take away? And I would love to hear from each of you what that is for you. What are those things that mean the most to you about SYA, or maybe you have an experience that just kind of defines that? So Mina, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So my personal take on this question might be a bit different, since I grew up in France, in Normandy, in a small city called Alençon, about 2 hours from Rennes. And I've actually lived a similar experience to the SYA one, but only in reverse mode. I moved to California when I was about 20 years old, so a little older than our students. And although it was a very exciting time, it was also very hard and scary. So I have a lot of admiration for our young students. And that's usually what I tell them first in Boston at departure, because they make a choice of leaving behind what they know, the comfort of home, to embrace a new world in a new language. So what my personal experience gave me in the US and what the SYA experience provides is very similar. It provides a unique context, which is the in-country experience for students to develop essential skills. And I like to look at SYA as a place where education is not preparation for life, but is life itself. I couldn't possibly enumerate all the skills I acquired during my time in the US, or the skills our students acquire during their time here. And believe me, we've tried to do that as a team, sort of counting the competencies and the skills. But what really stands out, what's on top of the list is language, of course. Doing SYA is a deep dive into the target language. And I remember 2 years ago, at the end of the year, a student sent me a picture of a dog drinking water from a fire hose. And it was actually an analogy to how much language he had been exposed to from his first day here, driving home with his host family, when he could only answer a binary question, oui, non, and up until the end of the year, he said, when he was juggling between the conditional past and the subjunctive. So I think also gaining understanding of a new culture, or what we like to call here at SYA perspective taking, beyond the new food, incredible new foods, don't get me wrong, the customs, the traditions, but really observing and understanding the distinct social and political perspectives is something that students can do here this way. Students' understanding of the new world that's around them helps them also understand their place in the world. So it's truly a transformational experience for them. finally, if I had to pick one more skill, based on my experience abroad and the experience we provide to the kids here, it would have to be independence. From physical independence, in maneuvering the bus system, the metro system here in Rennes, or in Paris, or even when we send them out to places without their phones, with a good old-fashioned map, to being independent learners and thinkers through real-life problem-solving experiences. So it's a difficult question because it's very hard to describe really how it's like if you haven't done it. But it's really an experience unlike any other.
Thank you, Mina. Pat, what do you take away? What's your moment for SYA?
It's a great question, and I thought as I was reflecting on it that it happened probably 10 years ago when friends and family and others who come flying over to visit or come back from something and say, what do you need from the States? And I just found myself always saying, nothing, you know? And, you know, comfort food, you know, and no. And even my family sort of remarked on it that what had happened to me was I sort of had internalized what we're doing here so much that I physically didn't crave food from somewhere else. In other words, it had so inculcated the message that we try to transmit to these kids about living here, doing, taking, you know, accepting the habits that are here and taking on some of those, even as a role-playing mechanism, that I had adapted it to such an extent that I physically didn't crave the food I loved that somebody could bring over to me. And thought, I think SYA is now in me, and it's permanent. That's a true story.
Thank you, thanks. How about you, Megan?
Gosh, there's so much to say. I definitely echo everything that Mina was saying about watching our students experience a new place and a new culture and a language. I think having studied abroad in Spain and having the opportunity to witness a group of teenagers, year after year, have an experience like that. I mean, it's very gratifying to see people transform. I like to always say, I've said to the students before and to some parents that I love the quote, that comfort is the enemy of progress. And so what Mina said about telling the students, I think we probably all do this, tell them how brave it is for them to have made this choice and to take themselves out of this comfort that they have at home and throw themselves into this situation. It's very uncomfortable for many reasons, living with a new family or in a new school, you're surrounded by a language that you're not highly proficient at yet. So being a part of that experience with them is really special. And I would say something that I always really enjoy is at the holiday break, right before the students leave, a lot of parents will come over from the U.S. to visit. We always have a reception and there's the students do a play, and to see the parents be in awe of their children. The kids, they're children, the students, they come over, they're not really children anymore, but they come over and they're in awe of Spain, and then they start to gain those kind of habits like Pat's saying, and then their parents come and they're in awe of their children. They're always in awe of their children, I'm sure, but to see them speaking this other language, interacting in this culture that for most of our parents is new or isn't something they know particularly well. It's always really nice to see that kind of feeling that the parents have witnessing what their children are going through as well.
Terrific, terrific. I mentioned earlier that SYA is certainly a expanded community. So we have our faculty, actually many of whom are long-term faculty members, and people on this webinar will know names of people that they admired and are still there teaching our students. And then we have host families, some of whom are even longer in connection to SYA. And just quickly at the France 50th, I can remember my SYA real moment was when one of the host moms was there and she had written out her list, and she probably had about 19 names of SYA graduates, many of whom had come back to celebrate Rennes' 50th, and many of whom were right around her. And I thought, wow, that's the DNA of SYA. That's just amazing, amazing stuff. So just maybe Megan and Mina, can you just kind of share a story about our extended SYA community over there? Any story about a faculty member or a host family that kind of elicits this kind of sense of history and connection?
Yeah, I can speak, generally across the board about our faculty team. They're just an incredible group of people, and many of them have been with SYA for 20 plus years. And so there's this kind of family vibe that the students recognize and talk about, and they write about it in their surveys at the end of the school year, that they can tell how much the teachers love their work and how much they love working with each other. And so that kind of atmosphere that's created is so beneficial in the school day-to-day interactions that the students have with the teachers, that the teachers have with each other. And I think all of the students really appreciate that. As far as the host families, they're an incredible group. We're very fortunate in Zaragoza to have such a strong network of host families. Our host family coordinator, Sole, does an incredible job of maintaining those relationships and continuing to find new families that she puts on our waiting list of families hoping to get in. I would say this past year, one thing that stuck out was I had a student come into my office. She would come in just to chat often, but she wanted to ask me a question about the holiday break, that her host family had invited her parents and her sister from the U.S. to come up to their little pueblo up in the Pyrenees during the break. And so, most of the families that come visit understandably travel around Spain, or they'll go to another place in Europe. And the student was nervous. She's like, I don't know if I should do it or not. I don't know if it's going to be awkward, to have the two families together. And they ended up doing it. And of course, it was just this incredible experience for all of them, and particularly for the family coming from the U.S. to have the opportunity to see what a Spanish family from Zaragoza, what their experience is like up in the mountains in this little town over the holiday break. So those kinds of connections that are formed while the students are here and then continue after they go are really important and special.
Yeah, I always love hearing the stories of the American family and their Spanish family, and the student is the kind of bridge and has to translate and all of that. That's fabulous. Mina, how about you?
Yeah, sure. I will echo what Megan just said right now. I mean, I think two of the main aspects or pillars even of SYA are its faculty and the homestay experience. So I'll start with the faculty because they play a central role in shaping the students' experience. Our faculty is well versed in teaching young Americans, and they're experts in their respective fields. So I feel very fortunate, and I think I can speak on behalf of both Megan and Pat here, that our teachers are capable of both giving knowledge, disseminating knowledge to students in a traditional way, but also assisting students with the learning process and applying the knowledge in real situations. With our ever-changing world, and even more so this year, our faculty's ability to adapt quickly and address both the expectations of today's learners and the unexpected, again referring to this year's situation, is probably what the highlight is for me. If I had to pick one one success story along these lines, what comes in mind first is how every faculty member and staff members worked together on March 13th when I announced to the class that they were going home within the next 24 hours. Part of the faculty stayed back at school and supported the kids that were still around, and the other half volunteered to accompany students to Charles de Gaulle and spending the weekend there, making sure that everybody was boarding their planes safely. And right after that, we had a very difficult 2-3 days, both physically and emotionally. And right after that, we all came back together at school, and we had a week to develop an online program for our students. So it truly speaks to our teams and SYA in general. And quickly, if I can talk about the host family, because that's it's a very, very important component of our program. I think it's a key part of the student's journey. We're very thankful to have a wide range of families who all have in common a genuine desire to host an American student and share their home and lives with them. There are many stories that come in mind, but I remember very vividly 2 years ago when I spent 6 hours in the emergency room with this host dad, and we got to know each other really well, waiting on his host son, so on one of my students who had abdominal pain. It ended up being nothing serious, and the student went home the same night, but it just reminded me of the level of dedication that and support our students get through their host family. And what's interesting about this host dad is his mom has hosted for us 30 years ago, and she happens to be my next door neighbor. And I got to meet her host son last year. His name is Walden Brown, in case he's on the call right now. He came last year in his 50s right now, and it's just they've kept in touch for over 30 years, which speaks to this very special bond that Meghan was referring to earlier. And I actually ran into my neighbor who's 76 years old last night. Her name is Maya, and she was excited to tell me that Walden was a doctor and can easily, quote unquote, easily fly right now here. You'll be visiting her in October.
That's terrific. Oh, great. Those are great stories. Thank you. And Mina, I'm actually going to pick up on a strand you were talking about, which is the evolution of SYA to meet the demands and the needs, not only of the pandemic, but of today's adolescents, which, it is a different world for them to navigate. And we put in place a number of things and changed our curriculum. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit more about that. And Meghan, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about, we've kind of done more intentional advising of students, and we've also got a support group for students who want to have some counseling from afar. So can you just talk a little bit about that for folks?
Sure. So yes, we've been working in the last few years to kind of beef up our advisory program so that we have more time, intentional time built into our schedules on each campus for advisory groups to meet and get to know each other. Our groups are small by design, which is also very helpful as students are trying to find their way when they arrive particularly. And we also use the Truman Group, which is a counseling service that's offered, and most of the counseling, well, it's always done online with our students. And so it gives them an opportunity to speak to a native English speaker. They specialize in expat therapy, so working with people who are living in a new culture, who might be going through any kind of culture shock or homesickness, and those kinds of things. And I would say also that an important thing as well is that even if, for some reason the advisor isn't the person that a student connects, the closest with, I think something that's really important about SYA is because it's a small community and we're all together so much of the time that I would say that, most of our students at least find that adult in our community that they can really depend on. So it often could be the advisor, it might be one of their teachers, the host family coordinator. It's often ourselves, I think, as RDs, because we work very closely with the students. That's one of the really nice things about this job, is that we're administrators, but we're not the type of administrator that's, locked away in their office all day doing, not being able to interact with the students at all. So I think just the kind of family feeling of the school in general creates a really strong support system for our students, in addition to the host families, of course.
Right. We've been very intentional also about our curriculum, and the way I've described it as I've talked to alums is really getting kids out of their classroom seats and getting them to use the local area and even beyond to really kind of do real lessons of connection. And Pat, you've watched that evolve over time, and I would say it's important for a variety of reasons that we've done it, and I'll have you describe a little bit more about what we're doing. But two thoughts I have is one, students are much more hands-on in their learning in the States, and so we've adapted SYA to be that. And also I think the college process, which has become much more competitive, really want kids who kind of take advantage of all those opportunities. And SYA kids navigate that college process really well because they've seen kids who are independent self-starters and also take advantage of hands-on experience. So Pat, why don't you talk a little bit about the evolution of the SYA curriculum in recent years for folks?
Sure. I have had the good fortune of working to rewrite our mission in 2015-16 as part of our strategic plan, and asked us to deliberately make our curriculum in line with best practices and the changing needs of our student body, and because of the changing needs of universities and the world. So we did some very careful looking at what it is we are and what it is we really wanted to do, and decided with quite, it seems easy now, but with a great deal of deliberation, that we really needed to have the students more immersed in their surroundings outside of the classroom if possible. But, and I say if possible because there are things we've done to bring people in more than we did in 2002 when I started, for instance. And so, for instance, as the desire to make an experiential, place-based program available to our students, there was also a need to teach science. And so I had the idea to create a science course in tandem with this new mission. Whereas all the other courses that were here would need to retrofit what they were doing to a new mission statement. And so we came up with an idea for a food science course that is a laboratory science that takes full advantage of the seasonal nature of how food is prepared and processed and grown. And that was sort of the what we would call the scintilla, the spark that other teachers then built their curriculum and their units around. Because just as it's a very, very popular course, students do love it, and they get a great deal out of it. For instance, this would be the time of year when students would be, it would be tomorrow that students would be harvesting grapes and making wine at SYA Italy. And that happens to be a project that, because it's so fun and engaging and sticky and sweet, that all of our students actually participate in, together with the science students who take it to other levels of chemistry and biotechnology. But I'll let Mina address the idea of field work in just a moment. I think we're gonna do it that way, but it really got the kids excited to such an extent. Each year we do that a teacher like we are here gets to see that you have a project where kids do not want to stop doing it. They don't want to go home at the end of the day. And we have many projects like that, and we are experimenting with others. So that's an example that I could give you hundreds of them, but I don't think we have time.
Well, thanks, Pat. I think, Megan, you were going to mention a little bit more about field work and how that's going these days.
I think Mina will start,
Mina,
and then I'll give an example.
Okay.
Sure, thanks, Megan. Yeah, I can give two examples. I think that'd be helpful for people to understand what happens during our fieldwork days here. The first one that I would like to share with you guys is one that happened at the very beginning of our immersion program. As our first fieldwork, we had decided on day one, it was September 6th, I remember that very clearly, to send students in groups of 4 out in the city, which is a 10-minute walk from the school. The faculty had come up with different landmarks that they wanted the students to find on their own. So we sent each group to discover these 10 places. It was perhaps a little ambitious, but we took their phones away, even more ambitious. and gave them a good old-fashioned map. And it was 1:30 p.m. when they left the building. We knew most of them would fail, and that was okay because fieldwork is about actively participating, like Pat explained earlier, and learning from experience and not getting all the answers right. So we had estimated the activity to last about an hour and a half, and students were supposed to return to school to report back. None of them was back by 3:30. We started to get nervous at 4 when they were still not here. I actually thought that a few of them were on a flight back to Boston. I was waiting for Tom's phone call. Luckily at 4 p.m., right around 4 p.m., they started showing up one by one. They all had failed. Nobody had found all the landmarks, but they had found their way back to school without their phone, using their map and the target language. So as a faculty, we felt like we had accomplished our mission. A month later, we repeated the same activity, and they left at 1:30, came back before 3 with a ton of confidence and asked what they had to do next, and we were done for the day. So so that was the very first one, and they mentioned that when we did that Zoom call on May 22nd to sort of wrap up the year, and I remember that they all mentioned that one field work. The second one I want to quickly share is a more advanced one. This field work was based on the national strike on December 5th of last year. The unions here had called for a national strike against the pension reform planned by the government a week earlier. And as a faculty, we decided that this was culturally very relevant and that we had to address it. And we wanted the kids to participate in it as well. So we took a quick 3-way approach, and we decided, number one, to teach the students in history and politics class about the strike itself and its culture. And the French language teachers focused on the language piece, teaching the vocabulary that was needed in the sentence structure around what was written on these banners. Number two, we decided to have students observe the strike. We actually went with them to keep them safe. We did not send them with a map and taking their phone away in this case. And we took them to the sidelines of the strike. And then number three, after going with them, they came back to school and they had to create their own banners around a cause that was actually dear to them. And I remember that day, like Pat was saying earlier, how during those fieldwork days, the students just hang out around school a very long time, and they're very interested there. They're actually deep into the experience. We finished the day with 6 p.m. and actually had to tell them to leave. Some of them were done with the day, but they were still working on the banners, because I think that they had truly lived something special together by going and watching that strike, and they had understood its meaning while participating in it, and that's a pure definition of what should happen in fieldwork. And I think we could have never done this inside the classroom.
And speaking of that, Mina, I'm struck in this conversation, but also when I meet with you guys weekly, how collaborative things are in SYA these days across the campuses. I think that's been a major change, a major shift, and the collaboration piece. And I don't know, Megan, you want to just maybe emphasize a little bit about how the RDs kind of work together across the campuses to really make things happen?
Sure, yes. So I feel very fortunate to have my colleagues in Mina and Pat, because we all get along and we get to work closely together even though we're in different countries. Fortunately, we have all of the tech we would need to communicate, but we've also been able to meet up in person as well, which has been a really great opportunity to get to know each other better. And it's just always, I would say, better to work together in person, at least some of the time. So we work really closely together, and we also have fortunately been able to find a way for our teachers to work more closely together, as we've adopted a common learning management system where teachers can see each other's Canvas pages across campuses if they just ask our wonderful tech director and Spanish science teacher, Tomas, to take care of that for them. We use Slack, which gives us an opportunity to share information really easily. And so I know multiple examples of, teachers checking in, asking for advice about something. It really came about in a very clear way, this kind of collaboration, when we went online, because it was, all hands on deck for this really short period of time to put something together for our students to have online classes. And so the teachers and all of us were able to really depend on each other across campuses.
Yeah, and we've had those special moments in the summer when we brought all the faculties together, including the faculty from China. And I should mention that because the applications were due at the time of the pandemic in China in the pandemic, we're not going to be able to run China for next year, but looking at what footprint we may have in China come in the future. But the important thing is that we've really kind of had conversations. And I remember in one of those moments where the science teachers from the different campuses were talking about sharing data and doing some things with classes across the campuses, which I thought was really special. And that was my hope in bringing people together. I know we're coming toward the end of the hour, and I've just been monitoring some of the questions. And one of the issues that comes up not only in the questions here, but also on people's minds is kind of the health and safety of our students these days. And Mina, I know that you wanted them to get that up close yellow vest moment, but you had your eye on the safety issues. That's really important. So I don't know whether people just want to talk a little bit about how we keep the health and safety of kids kind of front and center in our work. So I'll just open that up to any of the RDs.
I will say that it's just very easy to do because of the faculty that I've got that has that forefront in their consciousness. So it's not just a directive, but sort of a way of life. Right from measuring fever from before COVID all the way down to broken bones and mental health. We do very much care for these kids. And I think that there's a staff and a host family network that understands that what these kids might go through occasionally by being away from home and being in brand new situations, and how they might handle a sprained wrist or any kind of issue that would require the attention of an adult or professionals. It's second nature to us, I would say. So it's not even something that we have to remind ourselves of.
Yeah, I would just echo that our teams, I know on all of our campuses they're always willing and aware of what needs to be done wherever we are, if we're in our own cities or if we're on a trip with the students. And I think also what Mina mentioned earlier about, being at the ER for 6 hours with a host parent, that I think I would say, imagine, I know it's happened to me, I'm sure it's happened to Pat at his time too, where, we go to the hospital because, a student, in this case, I think a student had twisted their ankle running, and tell the host parent, no, it's okay, I'll be here. You can go home and I'll bring the student back, and they just won't leave. Like, no, I'm fine here too. So you kind of have this double protection over the students when something might happen in the host families also taking on that role of taking care of the students. I mean, they really treat the students like their own children. So that's, all we can ask.
Yeah, and that's totally reassuring to the parents on the other side of the Atlantic. That's really great. I know we're coming to the very end, and I do want to respond to one of the things I see in the chat, and that's about the kind of balance of the kind of what I would call traditional classroom work and this field work and how that blends. And I would say that you guys have done a phenomenal job of integrating those two so that the field work really is part of the course work. It's very much part of it. And in fact, I would argue, just having been a teacher, that field work, it stays with kids more even than the memorization in the classroom of some, you know, traditional kinds of things. So I think the curriculum at SYA has certainly evolved to be much more hands-on and much more memorable to students. And I would end it this way, which is seeing over the years the end-of-year responses we get from students. I think they become stronger and more positive in these years when we've been doing much more the kind of work we're doing today. I mean, I think it really sticks with them, and it kind of speaks to them getting to know the language better, the country better, and ultimately the world better. So as we finish this off, I want to first of all and foremost thank the panelists and thank these wonderful RDs who do terrific work day in, day out, and just say that the kind of positive responses we got from parents during this spring when life was totally out of control, you guys made it just remarkable for them and their children. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And just say that SYA is moving ahead, and we are in the midst of the first ever Capella campaign. And so there are a number of webinars that are coming up. Susan McLean will be sending you out more information about that, who's on the webinar today, and others. We hope to see you as we discuss more and more. The themes that were brought out today will be further discussed over the next month or so. So thank you one and all for being on this. And again, a special shout out to my friends and colleagues, the RDs right here. So thank you all for what you do. Thanks, guys. Take good care.
Merci.
Okay.
Arrivederci.
Okay.
Buenas noches. Ciao.
Bye.